I really like to incorporate the principles of observing, right? Waiting, listening, kind of looking at what is the student showing me. I find that very important to my sessions. And whenever I go into my sessions, I recognize that I am a person with feelings and needs behind those feelings. And then my student is a person with feelings and needs behind their feelings. I am the adult, but the session is ours. So I'm not here to lead per se, but to guide and to really seek and understand the needs of the students who I am working with along the way.
Hey there, and welcome to the Speechy Side Up podcast. My name is Vanita Litvack, and I am so grateful you're here. I'm an ASHA certified speech language pathologist, author, and augmentative and alternative communication consultant who is obsessed with helping SLPs like you stop reinventing the wheel and connect with other SLPs in the trenches. Have you ever wondered how other SLPs seem to be doing it all with ease? Well, around here, you'll get to hear firsthand how SLPs are really getting things done while keeping evidence-based practice and self-care in mind. Think of this as a coffee date with your SLP friends. Get ready to be challenged and encouraged while we learn together.
As both a parent and a professional, I've seen behavioral strategies everywhere, whether it's in swimming lessons, sleep training, or classrooms. I believe there's a more effective and compassionate way to support young kids that honors their emotions and encourages real growth. That's why I'm thrilled to share our upcoming event with you called Behavior Connect, Prioritizing Connection First on November 15th, 2024. This event is all about moving beyond traditional behavior strategies to foster authentic connections with children. We've assembled an incredible lineup of speakers, including Carrie Ebert, Rachel from PTSD SLP, Iris from EF Toolkit, Dr. Diamond Rashad, Jackie Jebian Garcia from Create Yourself Co., and more. You can grab your free live ticket now by visiting aboutbehaviorconnect.com or clicking on the link in the show notes. Don't worry if you can't make it live. We will have affordable options to upgrade for replays and CEUs during early access registration starting October 21st, 2024. Get on the list so you don't miss any updates. All right, let's dive into today's episode of the Behavior Connect series. Today, I'm joined by Julia Kharlamenko, MSCCC SLP, as well as TSS LDBE. Julia is a school-based speech language pathologist, third year as an SLP, who finds joy in working with the autistic community and with complex communication needs. She believes that operating from a compassionate mindset helps therapists move away from compliance-based therapy and leads to us fostering real, meaningful connections with our students and clients, contributing to a positive transformation of their progress outcomes. Her compassion leads to an increase in the use of strengths-based approaches, can positively impact co-regulation, and is incredibly vital to successful collaboration with other team members. When she's not being an SLP, she can be found traveling, cooking a new recipe, going on runs with her dog, and reading a captivating novel. Julia, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be here.
What are you reading right now?
I'm reading a lot right now. I am reading currently Say What You Mean by Oren J. Sofer, and I just finished a Mitch Albom book. I've been reading a lot of his books recently.
Who is Mitch Albom? I haven't heard of that author.
He's pretty recent, I feel. I've only heard about him the past couple months, but he's been around for quite some time. He's written Five People You Meet in Heaven, The Little Liars, Strangers on a Lifeboat.
How cool. I love that. You sound like me where you're reading multiple books at once.
Yes, I definitely divide my attention among a lot of different reads. Like there's always fiction, I feel, and then self-development books, and then speech-related things. So
I love that. That's great. So, did that bio cover everything? Is there anything else you want to add before we talk about the principles of nonviolent communication?
no, I think that pretty much covered it all.
So, what is nonviolent communication? Can you talk about the framework for it?
Yeah, sure. So, nonviolent communication, or abbreviated NVC, it's basically a framework for how to be compassionate with others. And it was founded by the late Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, who was an American psychologist, among other titles. And he really wanted to help others apply practical steps towards improving their connections with others, kind of across the board. So, whether it's with a significant other, friends, parent child dynamics, colleagues, relationships in healthcare, business, etc. He really believed that empathy was at the root of all compassionate communication and that it paves the way to truly connect with someone. And so, one of the things he says in his book, and I love this quote, is we talk to others or at them without knowing how to engage in a dialogue with them. So, also known as life alienating communication. So, things like labeling others or invalidating through statements like yes, but, or switching the focus to yourself and saying, like, well, in my experience, or well, when I do it, or even just making patronizing comments that we think are well intentioned, but really take away from connection. And when I read that, I feel like it really resonated with a lot of what's missing in this modern day fast paced life and helping professions like ourselves, speech language pathologists. We're not exempt from that either. There's a lot of noise of the red tape and compliance in the background that I find takes a lot away from that connection piece with our students and clients. And so, as a service provider, in my experience, compassion frames so much of our decision making when we interact with our students, teachers, paraprofessionals in the classroom, parents. It's kind of hard for me to say, like, well, I'm going to come in and do my job and then check off all these boxes and then leave at 3, because then chances are when I'm in that mindset, I'm not really exchanging in what Dr. Rosenberg calls like an exchange of life energy. So I'm not really developing a true connection with someone. And we know how valuable that is for our students' outcomes. So I'll give an overview of what NVC looks like. And again, this is not by any means inclusive of all of the components. A lot more information can be found in his book, which is titled Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life. But it basically can be divided into 2 branches. So the first branch is how we give to others, and then the second branch is how we receive. So, in how we give, Dr. Rosenberg calls that honest expression, and that includes the ability to observe rather than to evaluate. So, talking about what a student is doing, what's happening in your session, right? What's going on in a meeting, actionable things, describing them. We love to evaluate. That's just kind of, I guess, human nature tendency where we like to label. We might say the student is non-compliant or parent is challenging or this teacher is unmotivated to learn more. But one of the things of honest expression is being able to distance yourself from the interpretation and being able to observe what's going on. And then the next step would be labeling feelings and having a vocabulary of feelings, which he has a really large word bank for that in his book. And then you would identify the unmet needs behind those feelings, because feelings are an expression of unmet needs in everyone. And part of honest expression is also making specific requests for what we need from others. And that looks differently depending on who we're interacting with. So that's the umbrella of honest expression where we're coming from a place of compassion towards others. And then on the other side is receiving with empathy. So, how do we interpret what others say? And a component of that is being silent. I think there's a quote we all know where it's like, don't just stand there, do something. But Dr. Rosenberg takes that and flips it around. And it's, don't just do something, stand there.
That is so interesting. I love that whole perspective. Is he a co-author on some other books that you know of? I feel like that name is so familiar.
That is such a good question. He definitely has collaborated with other authors, and the book I'm reading now, Say What You Mean by Oren J. Sofer, it does reference him a lot, but I don't have, he has a whole list of titles that
Okay,
he's authored before. Yeah.
that out. That's
Yeah.
super interesting. And you're not the first person that's recommended Say What You Mean. I've heard like that book multiple times recently. Is it a newer book or is it older?
I believe this copy is pretty new. I see
Okay.
if I can. Oh, 2015 is when it was published.
This is really interesting. So you find that are you using this on like a daily basis in your therapy sessions?
I am, yes. So a lot of these principles, both from the expression side and the receiving side, I try and incorporate in different ways. And there's a lot of elements to them. I feel like it's a whole umbrella and it can feel a little daunting. But I personally, I work with the young autistic preschool population, and I really like to incorporate the principles of observing, right? Waiting, listening, kind of looking at what is the student showing me. I find that very important to my sessions. And whenever I go into my sessions, I recognize that I am a person with feelings and needs behind those feelings. And then my student is a person with feelings and needs behind their feelings. I am the adult, but the session is ours. So I'm not here to lead per se, but to guide and to really seek and understand the needs of the students who I am working with along the way. And especially with the population that I work with, I find that to be so integral. It's definitely a very dynamic process, and I always try and intend to be compassionate to any changes along the way throughout the sessions. But I really quickly want to go into the fact that because I'm only 3 years into the field, and I was in grad school not too long ago. And when I left grad school, it was kind of this idea of therapy should look like this, right? We have an adult driven table work activity, and the child should sit down and do it. It was there wasn't a lot of, I guess, diversifying to what therapy can look like, especially when working with pediatrics. And I feel like that mindset really kind of created the sense of shoulding. And the idea of shoulding is something that Dr. Rosenberg talks about too, and he warns us against the dangers of it. And shoulding is basically when we place these expectations on the behaviors of another person. So, for example, I might walk into a session and say, all right, I know what I'm going to do. Here's what's going to happen. And then subconsciously, I might expect something of my student that they're not ready to give me, or that for whatever reason, they're not ready to display at the moment. And shoulding is dangerous because it places all that expectation on the student, and it leads us to see them in a more negative way when they deviate from that should constraint, which can really detract from our empathy. So, in my sessions, for example, I had a session the other day where he's a little one, he's 5, and he walks into my room and he sees this bag of musical instruments. And we love doing music therapy. We love play-based, child-led activities. And this student starts to take all the toys from the bag, there's a lot of them, starts banging them really loudly on the table, on the chair, on his lap, on my lap, kind of throwing them against the room, trying to find the window and banging against the window. So I had to incorporate that principle of observing. And I had to identify my feelings too, because I felt myself feeling a lot of frustration in my body because I really wanted him to play with the toys as intended. Now, when I say that, I really wanted him to do something, I don't take responsibility for my feelings. So I really had to do that. I had to rewire my brain to say, well, what do I need in the moment? I had a need to connect. I was feeling frustrated because I had a need to connect. And what that looked like for me is us taking turns or me showing him how to bang the drums and him imitating. And then hopefully there's joint attention and shared laughs in the process. And the child wasn't displaying that. The student wasn't displaying that in the moment. So I wasn't getting that need of connection met. And understanding that helped ground me because I realized, oh, he's not the reason I'm angry. I'm the reason I'm starting to feel frustrated. So that grounded me enough to kind of take a step back and notice what was happening with the student. So again, going back to that observing, not labeling piece. And I noticed this student appeared really overstimulated by the toys because he was looking for all of these different modes of sensory input. There was a lot going on. So the environment I observed wasn't really set up for the student's success. And so that kind of guided me to take more actionable steps to positively impact the session, as opposed to kind of feeding into my frustration and possibly becoming more imperative and being like, no, don't do this, or this isn't what we do, or this isn't safe. No, give me that. All of these imperative commands that probably would have taken away from our connection. So instead, I moved some of the toys away quietly. He had an option of 3 to 4 to play with of the musical instruments. And I started modeling how I would play with one of the toys. I think it was maracas. There was one for clacking, one for tapping, one for banging. And so lots of different auditory sensory input there too. And then we took turns imitating each other. I imitated his actions too. And then I started seeing that this student is really responding well to this. He's laughing. He's really not expressing the behaviors that he was prior. And there's a lot of shared smiles, and then I noticed that not only did the student get his needs met, but now I got that need for connection met as well. And so now we're kind of engaged in this more fluid expression of connection that we hadn't been engaged with before, and it took some steps to get there. So just pausing more and observing, not jumping to your defenses, which can be really hard to do in those situations, and really focusing both on your feelings in the moment, what the student could be feeling, and then unmet needs behind both of those feelings.
Mhm. That's really, really interesting. And I love that example. So, just to clarify, some of the ways that you adjusted the environment was removing some of the toys. Is that what you said?
Yes, I removed some of the toys. I made a couple toys accessible that would provide different modes of auditory input, some toys or musical instruments that were a bit more high pitch, some that were low pitch, some that you could bang, some that you could shake. But I kept it to, I believe, 3 to 4 versus having that whole bag out. And I took the activity, actually, I believe the bag was also on the table at the beginning. I took it to the floor. Now there's more movement involved too. So
Mm.
just different ways to adjust that. And I guess hearing it almost sounds like, well, of course that's what we would do. But it's always easier to reflect afterwards. And then in the moment, it could be so tempting to kind of stop at the feelings part and not even label the feelings. But part of honest expression is being honest with, well, how is the situation impacting me and my feelings right now? And what can I do better for this student
Mhm.
versus, oh, the student's the problem.
No, it's a really, really good point. So, are there any other ways that you want to share that the principles of nonviolent communication can be applied to a speech therapy session? Or do you feel like you covered it all?
And it can look so different when we're working with little kids, older kids, in different settings as well. But I think as long as we're pausing and we're reflecting and we're labeling our feelings and we're really sitting with the student and trying to be attuned to their needs, I think that's really, and it's so much easier said than done. Sometimes I like to set little goals for myself. Like today I'm going to do less talking and I'm going to observe and really feel out their body language. Or today I am going to maybe I'll receive empathetically and I'll try and paraphrase what they're saying, like, or I'll look at their body cues and I'll say, you seem a little frustrated right now. So there's many different ways I feel that it can be incorporated into working with students.
Oh, I love that. I like that you're setting goals not only for your client, but for yourself as well.
Yes. In SOAP format, of course. Needs to be
Yeah.
measurable and attainable.
Right. Exactly.
Uh,
I love that. So, in what ways does operating from a compassionate mindset transform your relationships with your students?
Yeah, so I feel like it can really transform the way you see your students. And again, no one ever goes into a session thinking, this student is a problem or this student is non-compliant, challenging, difficult. We may not ever even say that out loud, but our actions, our tone of voice, our body language, and the things we choose to say might communicate that to the student. And that can just lead to a very life alienating environment, I want to say. And so, what I find compassion to be is just a very strengthening way to take myself out of that controlling fear-based mindset of this needs to go exactly as planned to be effective, or again, those should statements like this student should do this. They should be in their seat right now, or they should be using these materials, quote, correctly, which we don't like to say, because again, that makes the student the center of the problem. And then you're no longer looking inward, you're looking externally at the student as the center of the problem or the issue. And we don't want to do that. We're all well intentioned, but I think it can have a compounding effect if when we're not incorporating compassion and we are staying in this rigid, it should be this way mindset, and we're not challenging our feelings and not listening to what our body's telling us when we're getting, frustrated or annoyed or irritated, I think it could really lead us to feeling a bit isolated from our students.
That makes sense. So I think you're going to go into this in your last question, but this makes me think about a conversation that I had with another SLP a long time ago. I don't remember, maybe like months ago, but we talked about the idea that adults even like have trouble with self-regulating,
Mm.
that we also need to co-regulate. That's why a lot of adults go to therapy. So I feel like this model theoretically sounds really good, but it seems like it requires a lot of self-regulation from the adult. Am I wrong, or can you provide clarification?
No, absolutely. I feel like this model relates so much to almost like a double empathy piece, because we really need to make sure that in order to really understand someone else's perspective, what they're going through, we also need to get ourselves to the point where we can open our hearts up to that understanding. So you're absolutely right that as adults, we kind of expect children to do this too, like with labeling feelings, telling us how they feel and why. But this outline of steps, and that's where I was trying to say earlier, where it can feel so daunting to have to incorporate it all at once,
Okay.
when really it is. I feel like it's for me, I'm always going to be a work in progress and trying to do a little bit each day or a little bit during each session, whether it's with students or talking to even a teacher or classroom, and just trying to get really good at getting to the point where I feel regulated enough to be contributing proactively. And why I love this book is that I kind of just gave a brief overview of the steps. This book actually has dialogues, sample dialogues between different people in different contexts, and it outlines how to incorporate these principles in dialogues. And then it gives you a chance to practice that yourself as well, which I think is pretty cool.
That is nice. I like that. So it also seems like that maybe some parts of the framework are being implemented in the session, but maybe there's a lot of work after the session too.
Yes, there definitely is that self-reflection piece, and that's what we do, I feel, as providers anyways. Afterwards, we might look back and say what worked and what didn't. So I think there's a lot of ties to what's happening in the moment. I think that's really the most difficult part, is incorporating these principles in the moment and seeing, well, how can I kind of pivot the direction of the session as it's happening? Because I've definitely had sessions where I left and I'm like, ooh, like I definitely turned this into a whole compliance-based situation. And at the end of the day, maybe I felt like everything was, quote, under control, but I don't think I made the student feel heard, or I don't think I made the student feel seen. So how can I do that differently the next time? And I think if you don't mind, I'd actually like to go into a little bit about how this can translate to talking with staff as well, or if you're a school-based SLP, you're kind of encountering different personalities throughout the day. You have your paraprofessionals in the classroom, teachers in the classroom, you have parents, you have your special education director. And I think going back to that idea of we talk at people more than we talk with people, I think that's so important to keep in mind, kind of like you said, after the fact, but also before we go into a discussion, kind of setting our intention of, I'm going to get curious, not furious. I'm really going to try and come from a place of, I want to understand someone else's reality, someone else's perspective. This is so important during IEP meetings, which right now, 'tis the season, we have a lot of those back to back. But it's also just important during day to day collaboration as well. So, again, just applying those same principles of honest expression and receiving with empathy when, for example, you're walking into a classroom and you're kind of seeing their reality right now. It might not be aligning with what you would have wished to seen. There have been many times where I've gone into a classroom and I just feel myself getting frustrated. I'm like, I wish there was more modeling. I wish there was less prompting with questions. I wish they took a beat before they responded to the child instead of just kind of talking directly to them. And I find myself kind of using child student interchangeably throughout this. But yeah, it could be so tempting to fall into that cycle of should, and then to approach the teacher and be like, well, you really should model throughout the day. And the AAC device should be accessible throughout the day, which is true. But a lot of it is how we phrase it and using that empathetic language, which goes back to receiving empathetically. We kind of use that empathetic language to show them that we understand where you're coming from, right? So instead of like, don't be too demanding, we might say, when we don't prompt or when we prompt with too many questions, a child might shut down. Would you be open to learning a new strategy this week that could encourage more spontaneous communication? So here I'm using that empathetic language because I'm suggesting an idea while also inviting the listener to share their own perspective. And I'm using that positive action language. So I'm not really looking to fix it, but more so to connect with them.
I love that. Thanks for providing an example because I'm sure people were wondering what that looks like.
Yeah, of course.
And we talked a little bit about it, but can you expand on how compassion relates to co regulation?
Yeah, sure. So I think, kind of like you said, like this is definitely a big piece to unpack. Co-regulation is so important no matter who you're working with or no matter who you're communicating with, even if you're kind of outside the scope of speech in the moment and you're talking with other people. There's a lot that goes into the ability to kind of do that work and to ground yourself enough. And that obviously has a lot of steps behind it. But when we operate from a stance of compassion and when we are able to observe without judgment, when we're able to label our feelings and recognize feelings in others, and when we are able to recognize what is the need behind my feeling, what is the need behind this other person's feeling right now, when we're able to say all of that, we are able to regulate ourselves enough to then act positively. So now we can actually make a request for positive change. Now we're using language that actually helps us get our needs met, but also validates the other person's experiences. And I think a lot of the times we're very well intentioned with this, right? We want to go in and we want to have a positive impact. But this is where life alienating language seeps in, right? You should do this, or in my experience, we do this, or well, this is what I've always done, or yes, great, but so a lot of that negation as well. I feel like a lot of that can bleed into these interactions. And I don't know. I feel like when we take a step back, we can really fill our hearts with more capacity for compassion. And then we're able to be present with the student, with the teacher, with the parent, whoever it is that we're talking to. And now we're actually coming from a place where we're using language positively. So maybe we're using declarative language to tell a student, I see you, I hear you, instead of using imperative language where we're just trying to be in a more controlling adult, or we're coming from a more controlling adult led place. And so now, and then we can start using those clinical principles too, like again, declarative language, the power of choice, all of that becomes more possible when we are regulated. And then in turn, the person on the receiving end sees that within us. And gradually over time, they can meet us there too, because now they feel seen and now they feel more vulnerable to open up to us. And it ultimately creates this space of mutual trust, connection, and I would even say safety, emotional safety.
So, would you say that compassion leads to co regulation, but then compliance leads to dysregulation? That's kind of what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, I think so. I think when we're applying those principles of nonviolent communication, it allows us to come from compassion, and then that helps us be more regulated. But then when we aren't operating from that mindset and we are focusing more on the compliance piece, right? Because when we're focusing on compliance, we're really just focusing on like, what is this person doing for us right now? It kind of makes it about us. And the idea of compassion is, well, no, it's not about you. You're trying to understand the other person's perspective. You're trying to see where the student is coming from when they do XYZ. And I think it's very, like you said, it's very dysregulating for a student if they feel like they have to perform all the time. And if they feel like maybe their sensory needs aren't being honored or maybe their emotional needs aren't being recognized in the moment. So I definitely think that there's a lot of humility in being able to do that for your students. And it kind of really bridges that piece together with co-regulation.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. This has been really eye-opening. I feel like we've heard bits and pieces of this as a field, but I feel like you really opened up a whole new area that speech therapists or speech language pathologists can look into a little bit more and like look at the framework, read the book, and learn how to better use the nonviolent communication framework with their students and kind of like you said become like a work in progress, like continuously work on this with themselves, and not only will it benefit their therapy but it will probably benefit like their personal relationships too.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, by no means can we take it upon ourselves right away to seamlessly implement this framework. It does take time. It takes a lot of eye-opening conversations with others, a lot of self-reflection. And I think a starting point for me was really breaking it down into manageable goals. And the book helps you do that too. I kind of only grazed the surface with everything that I've described. I try to just make it as all encompassing as possible, but the book really goes into more specifics. And I read through the book and I go, hey, like I could really use some work on this element. And so then I try and find ways to incorporate that strategies either with students or with other members of the students' team. And it'll be amazing to see what more can come of our field once these practices reach more settings and more people. So, yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much.
I guess the last question I have is, do you feel like there is with practice the authenticity comes better? Because I imagine like when you first start off with this, there are so many facets to communication, right? As we know, there are things we probably don't even have a word for yet. But when you're interacting with somebody, there's so many things you're picking up on. Not only are like, is it the body language? Is it the tone of voice? There's so many subtle things that are involved where you can tell when someone's not being totally authentic. So do you feel like it just takes practice? Does he talk about that in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. That is such a good point. He definitely mentions, and I think he talks about this in the intro chapter where he says it may even feel robotic at times. It may not even come natural at times, and that's okay. With practice, it will feel more intrinsic. And I think his advice is just to keep pushing through those moments and hope that with time, it starts to become more internalized to the point where it kind of emanates more naturally to the listener as well, or to the person receiving it.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I don't know that I've used his strategies in particular, but I've used other ones with people and it works. And I'm like, that worked. I'm so happy that worked, but it felt so unnatural. Like, how do I duplicate that again? So it's just a constant practice.
Yeah, definitely. It's always amazing to have those aha moments and be like, wow, like this can really be implemented into practice and people are receptive. Compassion goes a long way. So
Yeah.
that's great.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Julia. If people are interested in learning more about with you or connecting with you, where can they find you?
So at the moment, I only have a personal Instagram where I sometimes upload speech content. So I'll go ahead and share that. It's underscore JUELSI underscore. And then I did want to share some resources and links to all of the material I referenced today. I'm not sure if you want me to go ahead and do that now or if that will be available in the show notes.
Yeah, go ahead and share it, and then we'll also put it in the show notes as well.
Okay, perfect. So the book that I referenced today is called Nonviolent Communication: A Language of Life by Dr. Marshall B. Rosenberg. And to learn more about nonviolent communication kind of as a whole, you can go to the Center for Nonviolent Communication, which can be found at cnvc.org.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Julia. I hope this will not be the last time that you come on or we collaborate because this has been amazing.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much for having me on. I would love to come back. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening. By the way, have you joined the SSU crew yet? By joining, you get access to the free goods section on our website, plus podcast updates, special event notifications, and therapy inspiration. You can sign up at bit.ly/join SSU crew, all lowercase, or just find the link in this episode description. Also, don't forget to take a screenshot of this episode so that you can always refer back to it and share it on social media if you really love the topic. Take care and remember to always fill your speechy side cup first before you can pour into others.